He's the T-Rex of political talk. Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network.
All right, we got about 51 minutes left in transmission. At the bottom of this hour, I will go directly to your calls in 22 minutes from now at 1-800-259-9231. Any questions, comments, statements, you disagree, agree with Daniel Estulin, best-selling author, investigative journalist, par excellence, 16, 17 years tracking the elusive Bilderberg group. We've been having him on every few weeks. Because he's getting so much new information on a daily basis. He's also got a tour kicking off in New York right now here in the United States. His book is now a bestseller here in the U.S., a global bestseller, way over 1.5 million last time I checked, sold. You can get the book discounted. It's like $5 less, and you'll find it other places at Infowars.com. The true story of the Bilderberg Group. This book has got hundreds of photos, hundreds of documents, hundreds of their wicked quotes, things you've got to read. You can also get it paired with ENDGAME, and Daniel Estulin is in that film, and a lot of the same info is there. They complement some info that isn't is there, just like his book has info that isn't in my film. They dovetail together. Amazing reading, a great coffee table book. I have given so many of these to friends and family. People that are skeptics wake up when they read this book. It is a lavishly covered book, very well done, a very well appointed book. It just looks good, reads good. The info's powerful. If there were 5 stars in book review, I'd give this book 5 stars. The true story of the Bilderberg Group, available at Infowars.com right now. I hope you go there and get it if you haven't. Going to Daniel Estulin. Daniel, there's a lot we're going to talk about today, why they're plunging the dollar, your inside info on that, any other tidbits you've picked up. But in 20 minutes, we're going to calls. But first up, my friend, you're here in the United States. Tell me about your tour.
That's right, Alex. I'm in the United States. I came in on Sunday night. We're in New York right now. We have 3 days here. Then we're off to Seattle and Portland. We have a couple of big shows in Portland, and we're off to Los Angeles. You know, when I was here in the United States in October, hardly anyone outside of the people like you and a few others were willing to talk to us, even though, as you said, my book has sold over 1.5 million copies. At the time, it was published in 44 countries. Now it's up to 51 countries and translated into 31 languages, and the sales figures are almost up to 2 million copies worldwide. Well, this time around, we are getting mainstream press attention. We did Air America this morning. We have some television stations as well today and tomorrow. We're shooting 6 info commercials this afternoon. They were off to Portland. We have a sold-out show there, and then off to Los Angeles. And again, I think finally the mainstream, at least the mainstream radio and a few television stations, we're not getting any newspapers as of yet. They're waking up, or at least not to lose their credibility completely. They're forced to interview me and give me a little bit of prime time, at least not to look bad in front of their audiences.
Now, Daniel, expanding on that, the reason we're talking about getting press coverage is, 6, 7 years ago, they would, up until that time, they would never admit that Bilderberg even existed. The New York Times, the Washington Post, publishers would go. They would then come back and not allow a word to be published. They would write other articles saying it's insane, it doesn't exist. Now it is in the Dallas Morning News. Now it is when Governor Perry went there. It is now finally getting attention. It is finally breaking out, and they don't like that.
Well, exactly. The only time over the past 15 years where we've had any attention whatsoever from the mainstream press happened in 1996 when Canada was in danger of being destroyed as an independent nation and merged with the United States. Thanks to our coverage of those events, after Fatidic Era in 1996 in King City, in Toronto, the mainstream publications, the Toronto Star, the leading radio stations as well in Canada, they let all that information out, and over 1 million people in 1996 came out to say, we don't want to join the United States, we want Canada as a free and independent nation. That was the only time in the past 6 or 10 years that we've had so much coverage, until, as you said, a few years ago, where finally, for the first time, thanks to large people like you who are getting all this information out to your listeners, the mainstream press begrudgingly are forced to admit that, yes, Bilderberg exists, they meet, but again, what they do according to the mainstream press is not all that important, as you and I know, and as I demonstrate in my book and in your film. It is very important, and the decisions that the Bilderbergers take accept and affect 6.5 billion people in the world.
I want to read a quote of the former chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations, the current president of the Council on Foreign Relations, stated in an article State sovereignty must be altered in the globalized era. That system of world government must be created and sovereignty eliminated in order to fight global warming as well as terrorism. He wrote that in 91. Moreover, states must be prepared to cede some sovereignty to world bodies, and the international system is to function, says Haas. Globalization thus implies that sovereignty is not only becoming weaker in reality, but that it needs to become weaker. States would be wise to weaken sovereignty in order to protect themselves. And then suddenly after 91, terrorism starts, the global warming hype starts. Now they've got to reduce our carbon footprint, which is what humans exhale. This is their total system of micromanagement and control.
Well, Alex, you just put your finger on it exactly, absolutely right. Again, what we're dealing with is people with very high principles. You and I may not agree with their principles, but we have to admit these people have, a single-mindedness of purpose. They've been going at it for a very, very long time. And one of the reasons we're not being as successful as we could be is that we're fighting a very principled opponent with techniques instead of fighting with their principles, meaning understanding what they're doing, understanding where this is coming from, understanding where they're going with all this information. It's not enough just to learn their names and memorize their faces. We have to understand why they're doing this. And again, one of the things you just talked about is the destruction of the nation states. Now, when you create multi-state unions, as you have, for example, right now in Europe, when you had one country, one constitution, one currency, one border, one army, and before you had nations, nation-states with their constitutions and their currencies. Now you don't. You have this one country called Europe. You have one country being created called North American Union. Now when you create multi-state unions, governments lose power at the expense of supranational governing agencies that supersede the authority of nation-states whose leaders, at least on paper, are elected democratically by the people. And such agreements as General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs and the North American Free Trade Agreement, what they do is they subtly destroy national economies by putting them under the imperatives of world commerce and globalization without borders. And that's what I mean, fighting principles with principles. People must understand, and again, I'm very grateful to you for the things that you have been doing on your radio show by letting people and making them understand what the Bilderbergers, the CFR people, the Trilateral Commission, all these secret societies and organizations interlocked amongst themselves, how they're very, very covertly putting together their plans for the New World Order, which again go way, way, way back in history.
But we are now alive in a time when we're finally seeing their plan come to fruition.
Well, I think, I think we better get our act together very, very quickly. I think we're missing a lot of opportunities which are being presented to us. And again, one of the reasons, needless to say, is the television, which has played such an important part in destroying, the free human spirit, because unfortunately most people, as you and I know, believe that what's on television is the reality, and if anyone tells them otherwise, people will laugh in your face because they don't believe that there is another reality. Their simple answer is, well, if it's so important what you're saying is true, why isn't it on television?
Which is an incredibly ignorant position, but they just have never seen the other side to reality, which is the true reality. Now, Daniel, shifting gears into the dollar. 2 weeks ago, Greenspan went out and told the group of Arab-producing members of OPEC to dump the dollar. And then I came on air that day and said, this is it. The dollar's going to plunge like never before. It wasn't hard to figure out. Then even mainstream newspapers admitted his statement did that. Now they're cutting interest rates again, which is causing the dollar to slide even more, while simultaneously putting out the news that we're not in a recession and the dollar is strong. How does this play into destroying nation states?
I mean, God, this is just so simple. I can't even believe that they're doing this in such a silly way. Again, I think most people don't read and don't understand, that they just follow knee-jerk reactions to whatever people in the media tell them. In 2005, right after the Bilderberg conference in Rotterdam in Germany, I said that, the demand destruction is being fully executed right now. The dollar is going to lose more than 50% of its value. I was looking at the Spanish edition of my Bilderberger book the day before yesterday, and I said to myself, I just want to make sure that it's in there, and of course it is. And I said to myself, 2.5 years ago, I was saying that what's happening today was going to happen. Now you have Cheney, who dumped his dollars. He just bought euros. Nobody's reporting on that. President Putin in Russia said, for his citizens to get rid of dollars and buy gold and euros. The Chinese government is doing exactly the same thing. You have a guy by the name of Bill Gross of PIMCO. He's one of the greatest bond managers on earth, who said last week that we're in the first inning of the housing crash. Now, one of the things that I think people must understand is this. Now, do we really believe that the investment banks that employ some of the brightest minds in America, who have studied at the world's most prestigious universities, who understand the fine points of high finance, thought that ignoring all of the standard criteria for prudent lending, issuing billions and billions of dollars of worthless loans to people with zero credit rating was a good idea? Obviously, the answer is no. Now, if we know less about high-risk finance than people like David Rockefeller, then the question is, why are these people lending us money? Until, again, we go back in history to 1929 and realize that it wasn't a Great Depression at all. It was simply a transfer of wealth. We, the great unwashed, as Kissinger and Rockefeller called us, we lost money, we lost houses, we lost our personal wealth and equity, and they gained that equity at our expense.